Sean Diddy Combs was on the scene of one of the most high-profile rapper assassinations in history. If you're thinking someone should really make a documentary about his life, he's already beat you to it.
It made me appreciate life, and it made me want to do things for the greater good.
It all goes back to one point. So I have a dream. A lot of times people see your dreams, they crazy.
What's the odds that you would do that in front of the camera? That's one of the moments where he forgot he was on tape. If I didn't say anything, you would interpret it as the hip-hop is fine with his behaviors.
Across the history of hip-hop, there's always been a handful of people you simply don't want to cross. Most artists try to keep their issues low-key, dropping subtle disses in tracks or settling things behind the scenes. But then there are those who do it different. They turn their feuds into full-blown public spectacles, throwing shade out in the open like it's a sport. These are the ones who don't just rap about beef. They live it, breathing energy into every feud they touch. And standing tall at the center of that chaos, none other than 50 Cent. The man doesn't just confront his rivals, he thrives on it. Every feud he steps into turns into headline news, shaking the industry and keeping fans glued to the drama.
Special ASLELS challenge for you, Floyd. If you can read one full page of a Harry Potter book, nigga, I'll give $750,000 to whatever charitable organization you want to. The bucket of ice, man.
Most people already know that 50 Cent didn't just beef with Ja Rule. He ended his career when it was at its peak. The clash between them became one of the most unforgettable feuds in hip-hop history. It hit so hard that the phrase "getting Ja ruled" turned into its own slang, meaning when a rapper gets completely destroyed in a battle. When someone gets lyrically wiped out or their reputation gets shattered beyond repair, people still say they got Ja ruled. That's how deep 50's impact ran. He didn't just win a feud, he changed the culture itself.
I can't say that I can resolve a situation or a beef with somebody that I can't stand this nigga. You understand what I'm saying? Like, this ain't WWF. It's not like I just got rap beef with this nigga. I don't like this little nigga.
50 Cent's no stranger to controversy. He'll go after anyone if there's tension, even his own family. When things went bad between him and his son, Marquise Jackson, 50 didn't hold back at all. He publicly called him a crybaby bum and accused him of just wanting a handout. It shocked fans everywhere because most people would never take family drama to that level. And the shine he once had seems to be fading fast.
It's so difficult to reflect on the darkest times in your life. Sometimes you gotta do that. I was up.
The night the documentary landed, it didn't feel like entertainment. It felt like something heavy had finally been allowed to breathe. Social feeds lit up fast, not with jokes or memes, but with quiet disbelief. The same name kept appearing again and again, Sean Diddy Combs, only this time, it wasn't attached to success or celebration. It was attached to questions people had whispered for years and never fully confronted. For decades, Diddy wasn't just a man in hip-hop. He was the infrastructure. He shaped careers, controlled rooms, decided who got heard and who disappeared. His image was polished to the point of being untouchable. Luxury. Confidence. Power. And when someone holds that much influence, silence becomes part of the system. Not because everyone agrees, but because speaking comes at a cost. That's where this story quietly begins. Not with flashing lights or court documents, but with control. Control of narrative. Control of access. Control of what the public sees and what stays hidden. Artists wanted in. Executives wanted alliances. Media wanted proximity. And very few people wanted problems. Running alongside that rise was someone who never bought into the image. Curtis, 50 Cent, Jackson didn't come from polish or protection. He came from survival. And while most saw his long-running tension with Diddy as industry drama, he treated it differently. He didn't forget. He didn't soften. He didn't move on. To the public, the feud looked one-sided at times. Social media jokes. Sarcastic captions. Old clips reposted with new meaning. Easy to dismiss. Easy to laugh off. But feuds that last this long rarely survive on humor alone. They're usually fueled by something unresolved, something seen up close. As the years passed, rumors followed Diddy like shadows. Lawsuits surfaced, then settled. Accusations appeared, then faded. People talked quietly, off camera, behind closed doors. Each time, the machine kept moving. Albums dropped. Deals were signed. And the distance between the man and accountability seemed permanent. Until it wasn't. The documentary didn't introduce brand new ideas. What it did was connect dots that had never been allowed to sit in one place for too long. Patterns. Power dynamics. Allegations framed not as gossip, but as part of a larger picture. And suddenly, the silence that once protected an empire started working against it. For 50 Cent, this moment didn't feel like shock. It felt like confirmation. Like watching something he'd warned about finally step into the light. And once the image cracked, people began asking a dangerous question, not about rivalry, but about responsibility. Because when power goes unchecked for too long, the damage doesn't stay hidden forever. Dear viewers, if this video is unraveling important information for you, please take a second to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so others can find this vital information, too. Before the allegations, before the documentaries, before the lawsuits made headlines, there was a carefully built myth. Sean Diddy Combs wasn't just successful, he was presented as self-made perfection. A man who turned ambition into an empire. From Bad Boy Records to fashion, liquor, television, and tech, his name became a seal of approval. If Diddy backed you, doors opened. If he didn't, they stayed shut. But power like that doesn't exist in a vacuum. Behind the scenes, stories circulated quietly. Young artists who felt trapped in unfair deals. Former associates who described an environment ruled by fear and loyalty tests. People who benefited from Diddy's success rarely spoke. People who didn't often disappeared from the narrative altogether. And the industry, dependent on his reach, learned not to ask questions it didn't want answers to. This wasn't unusual in entertainment. What made it different was how long it lasted. While Diddy's influence grew, so did his insulation. Settlements replaced public trials. Non-disclosure agreements replaced accountability. Each controversy ended the same way, no admission, no verdict, no consequences. To the public, it looked like resilience. To insiders, it looked like protection. And this is where the contrast with 50 Cent becomes impossible to ignore. Curtis Jackson built his reputation on transparency, not polish. He leaned into conflict instead of avoiding it. Where others played industry politics, he treated the business like a battlefield. And over time, his commentary about Diddy stopped sounding like trolling and started sounding like warning. He wasn't speaking as a journalist or a prosecutor, but as someone who believed the system itself was broken. Years before the documentary, 50 Cent openly questioned how certain behavior kept being overlooked. He mocked the silence. He challenged the double standards. At the time, it was easy to dismiss him as bitter or attention-seeking. But hindsight has a way of sharpening context. As more allegations emerged, some civil, some deeply personal, the pattern became harder to ignore. Power imbalance. Control. Fear of retaliation. The same themes surfaced again and again, told by different people who had little to gain and a lot to lose. Still, nothing stuck publicly. Not yet. What protected Diddy wasn't just money. It was timing. Influence. And a culture that often treats celebrity as credibility. But cultures change. By the time the documentary arrived, the environment was different. People were listening differently. Victims were being believed more often. And the old playbook, deny, settle, move on, didn't land the same way it once did. Suddenly, past behavior was being re-examined through a new lens. And for the first time, the question shifted. Not, is this true, but, how was this allowed for so long? Because when enough people tell similar stories, silence stops being neutral. It becomes complicit. The turning point didn't arrive with flashing sirens or a public arrest. It arrived quietly, through documents, testimonies, and stories that suddenly refused to stay buried. What had once been dismissed as rumors now appeared side by side, forming a pattern that was harder to explain away. Not proof of guilt, but a volume of allegations that demanded attention. The documentary didn't accuse. It presented civil complaints, timelines, archived interviews, former associates describing environments where power was absolute and boundaries were blurred. The focus wasn't on spectacle, but on repetition. Different people, different years, similar experiences. And that's where the weight settled in. Several allegations centered on abuse of power rather than a single criminal act. Claims of coercion. Claims of intimidation. Claims that young artists and employees felt trapped, financially, contractually, emotionally. In these accounts, influence became leverage. Access became control. And silence became survival. It's important to be precise here. These were allegations, not convictions. Some were still being litigated. Others had been settled without admissions of wrongdoing. But settlements don't erase impact. They don't erase fear. And they don't erase the question of why accountability never reached daylight. The documentary also highlighted how certain incidents were allegedly handled behind closed doors. Security teams intervening before authorities. Conflicts resolved internally. Stories redirected or softened before they reached the public. None of this was framed as a smoking gun, but as a system. A system designed to manage problems quietly instead of confronting them publicly. For viewers, this was where the tone shifted. No longer about rivalry or ego. No longer about music or business. This was about harm, alleged harm, and the imbalance that makes it possible. The idea that when someone controls opportunity, money, and reputation, saying no isn't always an option. And hovering over it all was the absence of criminal resolution. No handcuffs. No verdict. Just unanswered questions and people still carrying their experiences years later. That absence didn't weaken the story, it intensified it. Because it forced the audience to sit with discomfort instead of closure. This is where 50 Cent's role took on new meaning. His long-standing criticism no longer felt like personal beef. It felt like pressure. Like someone refusing to let the conversation die when it was most convenient for it to disappear. Not a judge. Not a savior. But a persistent voice pointing back to what others tried to move past. The documentary didn't conclude guilt. It concluded something else, that power, left unchecked, creates space where harm can hide in plain sight. And once that space is exposed, the story stops belonging to the powerful, and starts belonging to the people who were never heard. If this chapter raised questions that don't sit easily, take a moment to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe, because what happens next is where allegations meet consequences. Once the allegations were no longer isolated whispers, the response changed. Not dramatically. Not publicly. But strategically. According to reporting and court filings referenced in the documentary, the priority was no longer denial, it was containment. Keep damage minimal. Keep narratives controlled. Keep everything moving forward. This is where the story turns from accusation to mechanism. Several accounts describe how potential crises were allegedly handled before they ever reached authorities. Incidents addressed internally. Disputes settled quickly. Legal teams stepping in early. Not to determine truth, but to prevent exposure. In industries built on image, perception can be more dangerous than facts, and the documentary suggests that protecting the brand often came first. Digital footprints became critical. Old interviews resurfaced. Social media posts that once seemed harmless took on new meaning. Timelines were cross-checked. Inconsistencies became harder to ignore. And for the first time, the public could see what investigators and attorneys often look for, not one event, but behavior over time. Law enforcement, however, moved cautiously. High-profile figures don't get rushed investigations. Cases require evidence that survives scrutiny, not just public outrage. Civil suits progressed. Some were dismissed. Others moved forward. Each filing added pressure, even without criminal charges. The weight wasn't in a single courtroom, it was in accumulation. The documentary emphasized that this wasn't about one dramatic cover-up, but about a pattern of quiet resolutions. Non-disclosure agreements. Out-of-court settlements. Agreements that ended disputes without answers. Legal, common, and effective, but also deeply limiting for anyone seeking public accountability. And while the system moved slowly, public perception moved fast. Brands distanced themselves. Former allies went silent. Appearances were reduced. The absence was noticeable. When someone used to being everywhere suddenly isn't, people start asking why. The protection that once came from influence began to fracture under attention. Throughout this period, 50 Cent didn't soften his stance. If anything, he amplified it. Sharing clips. Pointing out contradictions. Forcing uncomfortable questions into public spaces where they couldn't be quietly resolved. Critics called it opportunistic. Supporters called it necessary. Either way, it kept the spotlight on. The investigation phase, as presented, offered no clean resolution. No dramatic raid. No definitive conclusion. By the time the documentary reaches its final moments, there is no dramatic ending. No courtroom climax. No final ruling that ties everything into a neat conclusion. And that may be the most unsettling part of all. Because real accountability, especially for powerful people, rarely arrives in a single moment. It arrives in stages. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes too late. What remains is a public figure whose image has fundamentally changed. Sean Diddy Combs is no longer discussed only as a visionary or a mogul. His name now carries questions, about power, about protection, about what happens when influence lasts longer than oversight. The documentary doesn't declare guilt. It doesn't pass judgment. Instead, it leaves the audience with something heavier, unresolved truth. For the people who came forward, the impact is already real. Reputations altered. Careers interrupted. Trauma revisited under public scrutiny. Even without criminal verdicts, speaking carries a cost. And the film makes clear that courage doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it comes with exposure and uncertainty. 50 Cent's role in this story ends not with celebration, but with persistence. His decades-long refusal to let the conversation die didn't create the allegations, but it helped ensure they weren't buried. Not as gossip. Not as jokes. But as part of a larger discussion about accountability in industries that often reward silence. This case also forces a wider reflection. How many stories never surface because the power gap is too wide? How many settlements close cases without answering questions? And how often do we mistake success for innocence simply because it's more comfortable? The reckoning, if there is one, is still unfolding. Courts may decide some outcomes. Time may decide others. But the cultural shift is already visible. People are listening more closely. Patterns matter more. And the idea that fame equals immunity is being challenged in real time. This isn't the end of the story. It's a pause. A moment where the public must decide whether attention fades, or whether accountability continues to be demanded, even when it's inconvenient. And that leaves one final question worth sitting with: when power and truth collide, who do we choose to believe, and why? If you value stories that don't rush to judgment but refuse to look away, now's the time to like this video, share it with someone who thinks critically about power, and subscribe to Crime Decoder. Turn on notifications, because the stories that matter most are often the ones still unfolding.